Now I pray the Father, said Jesus, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive, because it sees him not.
Welcome to the NCMI Global Leadership Podcast, where we interview leaders in churches around the world that partner with the NCMI and learn from them and learn how they do things on their side of the world. I'm your host, Ryan Peter Stradom, and I'm very excited because today we have family. We have Jonno and Erin Warmington from South Africa.
Not just church family.
Not just church family, we have real family. Known you guys for years, even before you became family. Erin is my wife's sister, my wife Shannon. And
Ryan and I were in a band.
yes, we were in a band together many years ago. We will one day resurrect that band. I think it'll be quite fun to do that.
I don't know if that's a good idea. I've seen old recordings. Ones that your brother sent me.
Yes, that's right. He sent those to me as well. I've still got to watch them. So anyway, Jonno and Erin serve on the NCMI team. They're from Cornerstone Church in Johannesburg, South Africa. They are deacons at that church. They've been involved at Cornerstone for many, many years, for decades. And it's really just excited to have you guys. Jonno is a musician, graphic designer. Erin serves at the church as a deacon, as I said. She's a lawyer by trade. Lawyer by trade. Guys, why don't you just tell us a bit more about yourself, fill in the gaps that I've missed.
You want to start?
Okay, I'll go first. Joburg, born and bred, still where I live. So when Ryan said Cornerstone, I think I was 6 years old when we joined Cornerstone as a result of going to swimming lessons with a family that were at Cornerstone. They invited my mom and us to go to the church. My dad was part of the Catholic Church. He grew up Catholic, but at a certain point decided to join the rest of the family at Cornerstone. Actually, I don't know what arrangement my parents had in terms of our spiritual education, but clearly my mom was like the one who made that decision because we always used to go with my mom to church. But so, I've been at Cornerstone since, the early, like the 80s, actually. And then was made a deacon when I was probably about 18 years old, so very young.
Okay.
And obviously that's when I met John.
Kind of fairly soon after the church started, because it started in 83.
Yeah, probably around 89 or 1990 was when we
that
joined.
was quite early,
It was very early.
All right.
I only know that the church started in 83 because that's the year I was born.
Such a significant historical year, John.
Such a great year.
Globally.
Important year, yeah.
What else do you need to know about me? I guess, yes, I'm a lawyer. So I've been, and this is more about my personality than anything else, but I've been at the same law firm since 2009. And I'm a partner there. And it's a big part of my life.
You work many late hours.
Many.
Jonno and Erin are the few people I know. If I phone them at 2 a.m. South African time, they'll still be awake.
Very, very likely.
And you know how you know that? You have
Because you
proof.
phoned me at that time.
This is true, but also because right now it is 2:30 a.m. and we've just landed from a flight.
Yes, that's right.
From Joburg. So in our time, this is 2:30 in the morning.
So we're looking forward to some interesting
doing
answers
great.
to questions today
Yeah.
with your jet lagged mind.
Yeah, so this is probably a good ad for Translocal Ministry.
Yeah, that's true.
Is jet lag face and trying to put sentences together straight off a flight.
Well, let's go a bit more into details to how you guys feel that God's called you into Translocal Ministry. Like what it is that you guys, what it is that you feel how God uses you in the kingdom, at Cornerstone and outside of Cornerstone in the larger sphere of things.
John still has to do his introduction, though.
Oh, sorry, John, do your introduction. Tell us more about yourself.
So I joined Cornerstone, also fairly young, but my sister and I and two older half-sisters were born into a family. Mom and dad are both deaf, as you know. And my mom and dad led a church for the deaf and actually still do lead it now. My dad was a sort of bivocational minister. He worked for as a sort of chemical analyst in the mining industry, and led a church as well. My granddad was a Methodist minister on the Methodist circuit, so I guess
Long line.
yeah, there's a long line of church ministry going on. At some points, I guess I was going to get involved. But sort of growing up in the deaf church kind of circles was cool. At some point, my folks knew that they wanted to have a date night on Friday, so they dropped my sister and I off at youth, and that youth was at Cornerstone.
Okay.
And so it was kind of when I started early high school that we sort of came across to Cornerstone, and so that was kind of mid-90s, and then ever since then been kind of part of the furniture. I think you guys joined a little bit after that.
I joined in 2000. So
Mm.
that's when I first met you. I think you just started university, or you were still last year of high school or something.
Mm.
Can't remember.
Yeah. So
I just remember going to your house once trying to find you because you disappeared for the weekend, studying.
Yeah.
You were like, "Where's John?" I went to your house, knocked on the door, looked through the window because your parents are away.
it's because I
And then you
studied.
emerged like 5 days later. Like, you guys were at my house? Like, when did that happen?
It's because I wrote exams because I went to university. But yeah, so been at Cornerstone ever since. I think in terms of coming onto, so I'm on staff at Cornerstone as you were before you came here.
Yeah.
I've-
Being Austin, Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
I started on staff in 2008. But I guess the story of kind of how I wound up in church paid ministry is a bit of an odd one, or it was a bit odd for me. I'd obviously coming from a ministry family church kind of background growing up. I also did. I was at school. I was keen on art and music, as I still am, and I was also keen on physics and chemistry because that was my dad's thing. Enjoyed computer science, and I guess I had just had sort of diverse interests, but I also knew that at some point in my life I wanted to do something that involved kind of building the church or being involved in church, but I didn't have any sort of working models of what that looked like if I was going to kind of be something traditionally creative, whether it was music or art. So end of school I studied design and multimedia, and I did some freelance work as a kind of music producer. Remember with Daryl in music studios in South Africa.
Yeah.
And just loved that, and kind of knew that somehow I was going to do that, but also do kind of church building work, but didn't have any working models of what that looked like, because when I'd finished school, all in my experience, the guys that worked for a church or with a church were either pastors or secretaries. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take what I've studied, what I'm interested in, and kind of set up my own business as a freelancer so that I could then have flexibility with my time to be able to do stuff with the church and kind of invest with wherever I can, find gaps to kind of use those skills. And then after, I guess, a couple of years of that, Marcus, who leads Cornerstone Church, spoke to me and offered the job. And it took a while to process it because I was like, it seemed weird to me to be like a church paid creative, effectively. And actually, at the time, or later on, Marcus told me that a lot of the other elders were like, had the same kind of worries, like, is he going to have enough work to do? I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough work to do. But I guess fast forward a couple of years, we've got a decently sized team now, and as the church has grown from kind of a single location to multiple sites across the city of Johannesburg.
There's no difficulty finding
There's no
work.
difficulty finding work. We have too much work to do. And then I guess as a base church that hosts a lot of NCMI partnering activities and events, and there's just always tons of stuff to do, and we've got a cool growing team of guys. So I guess the kind of the point there is that that I take from it is that whatever God's kind of called you to, you take sort of steps, and He might be preparing you for something that doesn't even technically exist yet. And so not having a working model in front of you is not a hindrance. It's actually just something that you just got to be kind of faithfully take one step, even though you don't know what the sort of end of the line looks like.
Yeah. It was kind of the same for me when I got into the writing, and it's just like I started doing that just based on what God said to me to do. He showed me like Silas and Tertius in the Bible, but like there's not much to explaining much more than what they actually did. But then Marcus and Glenn got hold of me and said, would I come work at Cornerstone? And
you were like, what am I going to do?
I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but like you, there was so much to do. And Marcus always just say, like, he used to quote that scripture, your gift makes room for you. It's like once you make those steps, it's like more and more, it becomes more and more clear what it is that you can do, what it is that God's telling you to do, and it's like God brings work,
And it's just being faithful with like whatever the next step is, and you don't know where it's going necessarily.
I think it's interesting as well. I mean, you guys have been deacons for decades.
Yeah, probably.
And I know a lot of guys say, well, shouldn't you be elders by now? Like, why aren't you elders?
Because elder isn't necessarily the succession to a deacon.
So,
it's not a linear kind of progression.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's good to just maybe chat a bit about that, because I think that's the mindset many people have, is that it's some sort of linear progression or
promotion.
Promotion, which, me being an elder, I realize it's pretty much a demotion. Because you have to deal with stuff you don't want to deal with. But I think it'll be cool just to talk about that. Just talk about people's mindsets around that, how people seem to view deacons compared to what we see in the scriptures. And I think you guys are a great example of like how we see it in the scriptures more than a lot of times how we've, perhaps by what we've inherited or just by how we think deacons should function.
Well, I think in the scriptures, when we see the deacons, we see that they're not like limited. They're chosen initially to perform administrative functions in the church, which was actually sorting out the kind of fight between the Greek and Jewish widows about who was getting food. But it was really so that the apostles could focus on really the ministry of the word. So that's where it started, but you could see that actually a lot of their ministry went completely beyond that, in terms of Stephen being the one who clearly was preaching the gospel a lot, which is hence the reason he got the ire of the religious leaders of the day. And then people like Philip, he was known as Philip the Evangelist, going out preaching. In fact, before the apostles even left Jerusalem, he was probably the first guy to go out. And, his kind of ministry initially being like in different areas around, but then eventually into Caesarea, right, where his kind of family was based. But you can see that it was more than just an administrative function, and neither of them and the other deacons weren't limited just because they were deacons and weren't considered apostles. And it
was translocal. It wasn't just
they were in
local.
Different areas, but we never also see them referred to as elders.
That's right.
But that doesn't diminish what God called them to, or their efficacy in respect of that call.
Yeah, I think we often talk about, we'll say it, we'll use the right rhetoric. We say, like, deacons and elders are functions in the church. It's not a hierarchy. There's not one that's more important than others. But often, I think in our experience, we can treat it that way. And so if we are talking about the functions, then it's got to do with a call. And so if there is a difference, and at least in our circles we talk about the 3 Ds that is reserved for the eldership role, which is doctrine, setting of doctrine, discipline, and direction. Even the stuff that deacons do to come alongside to help lead is in submission to that stuff. But like Erin was saying, there's no restriction in terms of apostolic work.
Yeah.
I mean, we believe when Jesus gave the Great Commission, he didn't just give it to the 12 or the 11 at that point. but it was to the church, and like you just said, like Philip was actually the first person who actually took it outside of Jerusalem, and then eventually Peter gets it, and he goes out as well. But there's a clear biblical model for, you want to call it translocal deacons. But again, it's just a function of service. Even Paul at times calls himself a servant, and that word is that same diakonos word.
But also, I think we've had this discussion before. It's like, and I don't know if it's complete thoughts or something we've fully like packaged. But the idea that your function as like a deacon or an elder or whatever ministry function is maybe linked to a particular local church. Because if, for example, like you guys did, you moved from South Africa to here, the United States. But that didn't necessarily guarantee because you were an elder in Cornerstone back in Johannesburg meant that when you came here, you would be elders in this church.
It's a local
it's not
church
like
function.
you're
It's
a global elder in
Yeah.
whichever church you pitch up in, everyone needs to recognize your authority as an elder. Or if you like, you're a deacon in one context, if you move into another one, you shouldn't be serving like in a different function in that context. It's not like your calling is deacon and that's it. I think it does actually have it depends on the community and what role God wants you to fulfill in that community.
Yeah, and when you're thinking positionally, it's hard to grasp that. Or if you're thinking professionally, because I know a lot of guys, they're going to study to be a pastor, and so for them, they think to themselves, I'm always a pastor, right? Well, maybe the call does sit on your life, but at the same time, like you said, it has to be tied to a community because it's a function. It's not just like a lifelong position.
But lots of roles or functions or, let's say, positions in the church can be pastoral in nature. It's not
right,
relegated
that's right.
just to elders, right?
Yeah.
In fact, like John has really interesting view of that for like being a worship leader and how those different fivefold ministry actually comes into all of those kind of those positions.
Why don't you unpack that? That sounds cool.
Yes, for a while, I've had this thought of just separating out the gifts, so the spiritual gifts, Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and other sort of named roles or functions. So, Scripture does use terms for elder, deacon, saint. I think of Philippians 1. And whenever Paul's listing the gifts, he never lists elder, deacon, worship leader, preacher in those gifts, because I think they sit in a sort of separate category. I do think that every time Paul does list those gifts, he lists them with the inside the picture of a body that has different parts that serves each other. That when they are functioning well, they mature the church, they grow up into the head, into Christ, Ephesians 4, obviously. So gifts are given by Jesus in that Ephesians 4 passage for the sake of the church. Like gifts are given not for you, but they're given for others. But then functions or role, or call it a call, is something that is, I believe, to the church. So it's to be an elder of a congregation, a deacon in a congregation, a saint, a part of a particular local body. And so with, for example, a worship leader type role or a preaching role, we see that, we see it happening often. We see it Sunday by Sunday, and we can think that that's the gift, but it's not the gift really. It's a medium or a role with which to exercise the gifts. Is how I see
what
it.
you're saying. Yeah.
So, for example, if you're taking the Ephesians 4 gifts, Jesus, when he ascended, he gave these gifts to men so that the church would be built up. And it's apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherd, teacher. And so if you are and those things, when they are functioning, build the church up. But it is perfectly possible, I think, as a worship leader or as a preacher to not exercise those gifts, but just be a great public speaker, a great motivational speaker, a great musician, a great performer. You can inspire, in the same way any secular speaker or musician could. But then you're at the risk of just inspiring people, but not building up the church, which is what the gifts are given for. Yeah, you're performing.
While this is not technically in the scripture, you're kind of separating talent from gifts in a sense. You're saying these are, in a sense, two different things. Because the gift is to the church.
Well, gifts are given to the church for a function, in order to build it up. And then there are channels or mediums or whatever roles with which to exercise those gifts. So if you are preaching, but you're not shepherding, you're not teaching, or being prophetic, for example, then like what are you doing? If you're leading worship and you're not evangelizing, so you're not singing the gospel, you're not shepherding, you're not gathering people, you're just performing. And I think that's often what can happen is you've got these gifted musicians who they have a genuine love for Jesus and they're worshiping him, but they sort of almost, because of they've got another working model or that's what they see and what they used to, they kind of inviting people to watch them worship as opposed to leading and shepherding people to worship. So I mean, you can go into,
which is a pastoral thing as well.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a shepherding thing. And you every song you choose is teaching. You're teaching doctrine, you're teaching theology. When you are including aspects of the gospel, the life, death, resurrection, and glorification of Jesus in song, you're evangelizing. There's people who need to have the gospel preached to them and sung to them and have them sing it. Weekly. I mean, that's what Paul says in 2 of his letters. Every time you get together, you've all got things to bring, to sing, encourage each other, teach each other with songs, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, instructing each other. So when we do get together and we sing, we're actually teaching each other. And if there's a lead worshiper or a worship leader role, who's part of that is administratively you pulling the band together, you choosing songs, you're saying this is our teaching material for this Sunday. Let's sing these songs over and over together, which is I think one of the privileges of sung worship is that you can sing the same song over and over and over and over, and no one like calls foul. But if you are a preacher and you preach the same sermon 2 or 3 times in a row, and people are like, "Hey man, like, are you just taking your weeks off? Like, what are you doing? What do we pay you for?"
That's true.
but that's the power of songs in church, is that it's like you get to go over the same material, the same truth over and over again, which is why I think choosing the right songs and having the right song lists in a church it's forming the doctrine of the church, and I don't think should be seen as anything less than that.
So I mean, if you just were to summarize the worship leader's role in a local church, Jonno, how would you summarize that? I know you're a very theologically minded guy and you write songs, and they're often very you do your best to put theology into those songs, and often to teach very well. But I think you're onto something there. Most guys are just thinking the music, or they're thinking the logistics around the music, or whether the music sounds good, whether the band's good. They think a little bit about song choice. Some guys more than others. But you're touching on something that goes broader than just that. So, how would you summarize what that role really is for a local church?
I mean, what I found helpful for myself, or even with some younger guys that we train up and we bring through, is to think of it in terms of like the job is not, or the job description is not to sing songs. It is to shepherd and to teach and to evangelize, to almost look at those Ephesians 4 gifts as lenses and filter your song choice and your practice, even like putting the band together so that you sound good enough to not be distracting. Because if you're unprepared, you come together, no one knows the songs, you sort of hack it out, and like you're getting the words wrong, the AV team's putting the wrong words up, or whatever.
It's not very pastoral,
it's just
because no one can follow you.
Yeah, it's not being pastoral. You're not shepherding.
Yeah.
So it's not for the sake of excellence. Like, I mean, that word sometimes, I mean, I don't know if anyone's into John Piper, he's got that one book, Brothers, We Are Not Professionals. And so depending on which side of the scale of like unprofessional to super slick and professional you are, that may or may not be offensive. But the idea behind any striving for excellence should simply be to remove distractions as much as possible. So you can sometimes be quote unquote too good by like polishing out any sort of leading of the Spirit, polishing out any sort of aspect of shepherding people in worship, where it's like the performance is more important, and then it becomes a performance, and like people kind of leave thinking, wow, the band was good, and then you've literally just not done your job. If the job is shepherd people, point them towards Christ, and let them marvel at His beauty and at His majesty, and that goes into song choice and all this other stuff. If people go around thinking, wow, man, Jesus is amazing, I saw Him in a fresh way this morning, okay, cool, now you've done your job. So just having kind of those lenses, like the set preparation, the band's preparation, the singing, the training, the arrangement, all of that is to simply do a job of getting people to sing together with one voice and to see Jesus clearly.
How do you guys think that there's always this tussle between the guys who want everything really organized and the guys who don't? Because the guys who don't feel as if you do, then you're quenching the Spirit. The guys who do want things to be organized, will use the word distraction a lot. But there is a limit to what is distracting. It will eventually just getting pedantic, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to say we need to create space for the spontaneous, but that's not the same as allowing distractions.
But can I say that the Spirit is not necessarily like, He doesn't only operate in the moment.
Yeah.
You can be praying the week in advance of the meeting, and the Spirit gives you something. That doesn't mean because it's like 3 or 4 days in advance, or even weeks, or even months sometimes. And then you bring that into the meeting, either as a prophetic word or as part of the song choice or whatever it is. It's not unspiritual. So I don't see why we feel like the leading of the Spirit has to suddenly happen in a moment.
Or that He only works spontaneously, which I think is more a style thing than a doctrinal thing.
All right.
To be honest, I remember, if you remember Jill Patterson.
Yes.
I remember often she would come with a prophetic word, but she'd have it written out. And which means that during the week she's gone and sought God, she's prayed, she's heard from Him, she's written it down, and she's thought, like, on Sunday, I'm going to bring this. I'm going to submit it to the eldership team, and then I'm going to bring it to the church. And to me, if we're using the word prophetic, and if an element of the prophetic is seeking God and hearing from Him in advance of the thing taking place, like surely actually preparation should be prophetic. And I think often when guys are saying, no, we don't want to prep, we don't want to put any preparation in, we want to keep it loose and colorful, we want to keep it spontaneous because that's more prophetic. For me, I think it's not defining it biblically. I think that's a style thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's great. I think we should have an element of both, of good preparation and holding your preparation loosely, because sometimes just you don't hold all of the keys to the meeting, as a leader. Like, that's why Paul says, when you get together, everyone's got something. And so being able to respond to...
I can add in something from a lawyer perspective, because I'm a litigator, and so we have so many different factors and people involved in a process, right? So the first thing we teach our junior attorneys when they come in is that, be super, super organized, but also super flexible, because it's never going to go according to the way. But actually, the more skilled you are, the more flexible you can be.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just thinking, like, you as a musician, I don't mean to interrupt you, Erin.
No, but that's
for you, preparation is a lot easier than for others, because you've played guitar and sang, been in led worship in so many settings that it's not difficult for you, in a sense, to just pick up your guitar and do it again. But there's preparation that's there's years of experience, which is part of the preparation for that. Like it's like what you're saying. Erin.
Yeah. Like musically, I can almost, if you think of it in terms of pop versus jazz, pop music typically is far more programmed, arranged, and the song happens this way, and we're not ad-libbing, we're not making it up on the spot, we're not being spontaneous. Whereas jazz is all about reading each other, interpreting the piece of music in front of you, depending on how it feels on the day and who's playing. And I think, again, it's a stylistic thing. You've got to know who your musicians are, who's with you. Some bands, I'll probably lean to being more prepared because it helps those musicians. Other guys I can be looser with because I know those guys can handle it, and handle it in a way that's not distracting and makes it feel like you've got that ability to flow. And so I think, I mean, I'm
just thinking, if I do plant a church one day, I'll call it Jazz Church. You see, I aspire to jazz, but I'm not there.
I mean, you're gonna get a certain
that was a metaphor, by the way.
to that church, you know that.
That was a metaphor, not John saying we should play jazz at church.
Although I think we should. But I mean, there's this kind of, I guess it's now a bit of a legendary quote. Leon van Dahl talking different area, but he's talking about preaching. And he was saying that when you prepare to preach, prepare as if there's no Holy Spirit, but then when you get up to preach as though you haven't prepared. And it's obviously what he's saying there is not like you need to prepare fully enabled and empowered by the Holy Spirit. So he's not saying that, but he's saying don't let your preparation restrict you when you get up. Be open to the leading of the Spirit if that takes you off script. So I think even when I prepare musically with whatever band I'm working with, I'll kind of take a similar approach of let's arrange. Let's start with the bass line, whether it's a recording of a song or whatever, so that we're all on the same page, and let's work with a script, and then let's learn how to move off script. In the moment, like work on some good communication so that we can drop a part, repeat a part, linger in a section, and to be spontaneous in the moment as well. And some musicians are better at doing that than others. And you just got to know your team. And I think it extends obviously beyond a music team to any leadership team, that if you're leading a live meeting together where you've got so many moving parts. Like some people will work better with more structure and others with less structure. And I think we can over spiritualize which is better or worse. Because I've seen great fruit in both models. And even within our ranks, we've got churches that are way more, I mean, if you want to use a dirty word, liturgical in their structure. It's just a modern contemporary church liturgy. We've got our own version of that.
Yeah, we do.
And others that are like just all loose in color, and it's a style thing. I think Scripture isn't prescriptive about what a church program needs to look like. But I think you do need to work with the people you've got and the culture that you've got. And
that's
I think
important because I mean, coming from South Africa to America has been, there's South Africans are generally more expressive in worship, just naturally. I think it's the culture that is just more expressive culture. Like you go to Brazil, it's a very expressive culture. America is different culture. It's expressive in some ways, in other ways it's not. And that's good to learn, because like you can't say your culture is more biblical. You have to realize
it's a style thing.
The Spirit works, outside of your culture and in your culture and in the culture of others and outside of their culture.
And that was one of I think our biggest learnings when we first spent some time in the States in 2011. Erin was...
I was doing my master's at NYU. So we were in New York for a year. But there weren't any NCMI churches in New York at the stage. And so we had to find a new church for a year. And it was like, you've just heard, I've literally been in Cornerstone since I was a kid. It was like, how do you find a new church? And the church we chose stylistically was completely different to Cornerstone. And initially, because it was more liturgical, maybe more conservative, you'd say. Stylistically. But when you listen to what was being preached, and you could see the fruits, and you could see especially of the leaders, right? As you spend time there, you recognized,
and the community groups.
You recognized that these people understood God's word, understood the gospel, it was alive there. But it's interesting how I went from, just because in this church they didn't like raise their hands a lot during worship, or like weren't very maybe demonstrative during worship. I was like, are they free kind of thing? You can start to think that they don't have a grasp on who the Holy Spirit is. But honestly, it was more a style thing than it was actually, it was just an expression rather than actually evidence of their theology.
Yeah. So the big learning for us, and I believe now in hindsight, that was like part of God's plan to prepare us for translocal ministry, which, we came into team maybe 2 years after that, was to just be able to discern the difference between style and doctrine, what is biblical and what is merely an expression of a biblical doctrine.
And you're not always going to get it right, but once your mind's open to it, you are a little bit more self-aware, I think. I'm probably not self-aware in everything, but I think that, my mind is often thinking now, is this a South African thing or not? And so, there's a difference between churches in California and Texas as well, and your mind now is kind of thinking about that, thinking, okay, what we say, is the Bible, maybe we got to sometimes figure out, is that our culture or is that really what the scripture says?
We once went from spending time with a church in Portugal to spending time with a church in France, in Paris. And
just across the border.
Stylistic, you cannot get two more different expressions of worship. People in Portugal, in Porto, like literally dance during worship. They are so excited. It's always the most like celebratory kind of any church meeting is just like, and then France is far more like conservative, and people are like singing quietly, like in their like seat. And
then,
but it's just cultural, 100%.
And you're preaching, and you sort of via an interpreter, and you're not sure if anything is getting through. And then afterwards, the guy tells you, "Man, I was crying." I'm like, "Well, I didn't see anything." But it is that thing that's we can spend a lot of time and a lot of our effort on the type of response that we are expecting, and based on our own culture. And kind of misjudge what God's actually doing, and so just that culture thing is a big thing.
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly go back to just a quick music thing, Jonno, because I've got to be careful here. But I'm thinking about, how do you inspire creativity in the local church, or how do you think of creativity in the local church? And why I'm saying that is because we tend to rely a lot, at least in some of our Western influence, on a lot of the commercial outfits available to us. So in other words, like these big bands, most of them come from America, the Hillsongs or the Bethels or the Elevations, guys that are really, really quite good at what they do. They're really good at publishing and marketing as well. And so we tend to use a lot of what they give, which is great. That's great. That's how what God's done through them.
We're very grateful for them.
We're very grateful for that.
Definitely.
But sometimes I think we can lose the flavor of a local church, or we can almost think our creatives aren't good enough. We'll never be those guys, so we won't ever even try to write our own songs, or we won't try to just be a little bit more ourselves or whatever. And so there's this balance between, and I think it does come down to an excellence thing, because what's excellent in music is not, there's definitely an excellence in music, like, play things in tune or whatever. But when it comes to style, there's not one more excellent style than another. And a lot of that has to do with culture. So, I just think that more can happen in a local church on a creative side of things. I don't know if you agree, but that's what I think. And I don't know, you as a songwriter, you've often tried to write songs for Cornerstone, where Cornerstone's prophetic season is at, where God seems to be doing with you as a local body. And a lot of those songs also translate well into other churches and translocally, and we sing them at Equips or whatever. But your first thinking is often, unless this has changed the last time I spoke to you about this, is often what's going on in the local church, and I'm writing for the local church. So I thought it'd be cool just to expand on your thinking on that.
Yeah, I think maybe to start with your first, one of your comments was about excellence. Yes, there's no one style that's more excellent than another, but some styles, you could argue, or certain types of songs are better at getting people involved, or are more shepherding. They, if I go back to the gift lenses, if you will, some songs are just because of the kind of song it is, how wordy it is, the kind of melody it is, the kind of range it has. They're great songs. They can be beautiful songs, but they're just not inclusive songs. They're not very shepherd-hearted songs. And so they fulfill a sort of different function in a local church. So they can be, sometimes just call it a devotional song. It's a song that's kind of great to listen to, connects you with Jesus, but it's difficult to sing for a group of people. And that can just often fulfill a different role in a local church, where it's sort of it's kind of a prophetic role. So sometimes maybe someone brings a prophetic word or an encouragement or a scripture to share with the church, and the intent is not for the whole church to like sing this prophetic word together, but to hear it. And so I think those kinds of songs, they're prophetic, they're incisive, they're direct. They can be presented like that. And so then it almost doesn't need to be excellent in the sense that it's super singable. It's like an anthem, and like anyone can sing it. But when it comes to songs for the local church that you intend the church to be able to sing together with, then you're talking about a different kind of song. You are looking at ones that they are, I think, rarer because they're hard to write, to be honest. Like I've been writing songs for as long as I've been playing music, which is, 25 years, and it's the rare song that does do well as a congregational song, a congregation-friendly song. So while you say we've got these other big bands and big churches contributing, they'll put an album or 3 out, and there'll be 1 or 2 songs that actually work for a congregation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so the way to do that is just to write hundreds of songs and encourage more songwriting. And I think because people write original songs and they try and sing it in their local church and they just don't take off, they get despondent, and then like people aren't singing it and you think, maybe I'm not a good songwriter. I think there's room for different kinds of songs, like songs that are prophetic and they're not meant to be sung together, but they are meant to encourage and inspire. And like if you're okay with writing a song and putting all the effort into writing a song that we don't sing week on week on week for 3 years, but to do it once, maybe twice. I've had a couple of songs that I thought maybe this is a good congregation song. I've sung it twice and I think it's not. It was for a season. It was a response to a prophetic kind of season that God was taking us through as a local church, and it had a moment and guys have had good feedback, but they're not congregational songs, so it's not going to go into our worship file that sort of gets rotated through. What was your other question?
Yeah, my question was just, thinking around writing for the local church rather than...
And I think, but that's something that is good about encouraging songwriting in the local church, is that God does, just as every church has its own expression of style, even prophetically, God can be working with one community in a different way, working through his different doctrines or emphasizing certain things that you can just be a lot more incisive about. Like I said earlier, you can sing the same thing over and over and over again, but you can only preach it once or twice before people are like, move along. So I mean, for an example, we've just recently at Cornerstone finished a series on the Lord's Prayer, just kind of taking the Lord's Prayer in Matthew and line by line, preaching through every aspect. And Francois and I, one of the guys at Cornerstone, like there are a couple of songs based on the Lord's Prayer that are out there, but like just felt like they didn't fit, like the mood was wrong. They felt like you were really sorry, like musically it felt like you were really sad to be asking God to approach him in prayer, And I thought, like, actually, we can write a better song, a song that's feels like our Father in heaven and like approaching this throne of grace and kind of everything with that. So just through like hammer and tongs at that and tried and worked at quite long and hard and lots of versions of it, and eventually we kind of found something that we could sing, and we worked it together, tried it one or two at like a prayer meeting, smaller platform, tested it out on a few people, and it seemed to work well congregationally, and so we then sang that at a couple of our sites, and so we're still singing it now, and but it's specific because it was for Cornerstone. It's something that we were preaching through. We felt God had his finger on this thing, and just like the disciples come to Jesus in Luke's version and say, teach us to pray. We were doing the same. Like, God, teach us to pray as we work through this series. And as we were preaching through it line by line, we were singing it kind of every single Sunday. And so the hope is you now taking the message that we've been preaching and putting it to a catchy, hopefully, melody that can like stick in your head. And then as you go and you're thinking about these things, you've got a melody to kind of put that theology onto and to carry you through. And so hopefully when you do go and pray, you've got a song that can help you with that. So
Excellent, yeah. That's great.
I punt something.
I'll go for it.
So for the Equip next year, the Global Equip,
Yes.
the theme is for the King and his kingdom. It would be great if we had some of our own songs written from our churches
That would be great, yeah.
about the King and his kingdom.
That would be awesome.
People should give it a shot.
They should. I think they should. Yeah, I think they should.
And to lean
like
in-
you say, like if you write a song and no one likes it, it doesn't mean it's a bad song sometimes. It just might not be
the song
for the context.
that particular
Yeah,
context.
That's quite freeing, yeah.
Yeah, but just to open it up and encourage the co-writing thing. Like often songwriters, I know as a creative myself, you can hold on to this. This is your precious baby that you worked so hard on. But to just lean into the co-writing thing, lean into like be open-handed with your baby and your idea. Submit stuff to other songwriters, other musicians, and then if guys are saying, like I know I've got a couple of guys that if I show them some ideas that I think have potential, I know that they can be honest with me, and I trust their opinion enough to be able to call out a song that's just an average idea that isn't great or doesn't have legs. But if I know if I can get, say, 3 particular guys I have in mind to, if they show some excitement about an idea, either musically or melodically, then it's like actually there's a pretty good chance that the song will work in a local church. And so you often just don't hear that stuff because you're working on your own, but working with others, taking critique, and even just democratizing the songwriting process means that if you can all buy in and all get excited about this thing, you've got a sort of little miniature version of a congregation there, because like writing for a congregation is hard because you can't just write your favorite genre or your favorite thing that you're aiming for a niche audience.
Yeah.
The church is multicultural, multi-age, like stylistically all over the place, and we're trying to write a song that everyone can sing together. Like that's actually quite hard. So the more voices I think that you have contributing to what that song sounds like, and if you can get all of those voices to get excited about something and contribute to it, like it's, I think, got more chance of actually doing well in a and taking legs in a
Excellent. That's cool.
in a congregation.
I've lots to ask you there. But we'll spend hours talking about that. I just wanted to ask you guys one more question, Erin and Jonno. It's just interesting to me how you guys have often approached the apostolic, the translocal. And Erin, I think your job's been quite helpful in doing this. You've really used your employment to help you guys do this. And that is that you've kind of gone to churches and you spent considerable time with them. You've not, like, it's okay to go in there for a weekend or a week or whatever. But you guys have kind of gone in for like 3 months. You even spent a year, even though it wasn't in NCMI Partnering Church, but you spent a year in New York.
6 months in London.
So
6 months in London. It was 6 months,
the-
actually. 6 months in London,
The
right?
2 big ones we did were, I mean, it was a little bit self-interested because it was my brother that was planting a church, so he and his family were moving to London. So we did 6 months in London, and then more recently it was about 6 weeks 2 months.
2 months.
2 months in France, in Annecy, which is on the eastern side of France near Geneva. So sorry, those were the two big ones. I'd love to have more opportunities to do that, but sorry, your question?
My question simply is has that been deliberate?
Yeah.
Have you had, okay, so explain your thoughts behind why you've done it that way.
Why not? I think the more we've been on team and you spend time in these churches in completely different parts of the world, there's like a degree to which when you spend time, especially I think with the elders in those churches, the leaders, some of them are in really like tricky contexts. I think here in the United States, we're used to, or not we, you guys are probably used to, like, just there's lots of churches. Christianity is, there's lots of Christians. Same in South Africa. Christians all over the place. Church is very normal. Huge percentages of the population go to church on Sunday. But, like, you go to places in Europe, you go to Australia, places in Asia, and church is actually not part of their life, their world. And you see these very brave men and women going and planting churches in those cities, and often working, full time, looking after their kids, doing the whole thing. And so some of it's just to it's more than just pitching up on a Sunday and preaching at one meeting. It's to be part of the community. It's to be part of their lives. Also, you got to be kidding yourself if you can walk into a completely different country and know what the culture's like. Pitching up there on one Sunday is not going to do that. So spending time with those people in their day-to-day lives is, it's a privilege. And so, my job, the first one, I wasn't in a particularly powerful position in the firm yet or influential, but I just knew that I could organize a secondment to a law firm in London, and I just was like, I'm going to make it happen. And I did. I promised. I submitted it to God, and the elders at Cornerstone were like, it's good. So then I was like, and we did. I literally chose the dates and lined them up with when my brother and his family would be in London, and we were like, we can do this for 6 months. Otherwise, afterwards, there's tax implications. And then more recently, the one in France was really because I'm a partner in the firm now, and effectively I can do what I want with my time, which that flexibility is amazing. But for people who have that flexibility, you should consider it. And also now, after COVID, the ability to work in different places, and we have all that technology to back us up. So I was literally an hour time difference, and that's all I had to manage with my team back home. John, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Well, it's good how it opens your mind to thinking about it.
Yeah, I think the fact is, if you are visiting a church, I can't remember who said it, but the idea with translocal work is more to build and not to bless. I mean, if you want to bless, just hire in someone. But if you want to do apostolic work, it's about building relationship and building with a community. And so, not that there's anything wrong with doing a weekend visit, but there's only so much you can do. And just the fact that you're in with a church for a weekend means that you aren't seeing what that church is normally like, because it's already different because you're there. And so. But once you're there for a couple of months or a couple of weeks, then you start to see the real rhythms and the real relationships and the real people and what they're like, and then it just helps you to just gain more insight and actually, I think, be able to do some more practical building. I mean, the fact that we can travel the way we do now, you can jump on an airplane. I mean, 30 hours ago we were on the southern tip of Africa, and now we're here. It's a weird thing to think about, but I mean, when you read Acts and you read of Paul and Silas and Barnabas and their travels, stuff was way different then. And Paul would sometimes drop in for a day and move swiftly on to the next town, but other times he was in Corinth for a year and a half. He was in Ephesus the second time he rolled through there for 2 years. There's like, I mean, sure, he's planting and he's building, but there's different things you can do with extended stays, and we're in a privileged position, and I think like in the plan of God where we can, you know, with work, do that. So I can work remotely. Erin can work remotely. We don't have any children, so that's another particular.
That is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have to worry about schools, and I mean, just as this might sound a bit odd or controversial, but you know, the way Paul viewed his apostolic role, and you know, talking about marriage and how marriage is good and it's beneficial and it's a blessing, but he says someone who's married has to care for their family. Where someone who's unmarried can devote all their time to the Lord, and in a certain measure, we've got a bit of that without having kids.
It's just a practical consideration.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, whereas many guys maybe have to wait until the kids are out of the house or whatever, or old enough to look after themselves before they can kind of travel like that, and especially on longer trips, we can. And so it's a case of, in this other stage of life or position in life, on what your call is, and lining that up with the call of God.
I think if you just,
the position is.
part of what we've learned is like when you have the opportunity and the flexibility is to like, just to take it. When those gaps open up, you can make use of them. Yeah, at one point I was joking about being a professional, like, not professional, but like a permanent church planter, supporter. Like every time someone plants a church, you just move in to the country with them for like 6 months to a year,
Yeah, why
just
not?
to help them, because it's really tough.
It is tough.
And then you're like, cool, when they've like a little bit established and on their feet, you're like, cool, I'm going to go find the next
Yeah,
one.
why not?
Yeah.
Why not? It
But then-
seems scriptural. Why not? I mean,
Yeah, but then, like you see with this, with Acts, like you going back to a home base every time. So
Yeah.
and having Marcus and the team at Cornerstone being all about the apostolic, all about the nations.
I've
Like,
never said no.
yeah, they've like super open-handed, and it's honestly, it's amazing to be able to have the privilege to be able to do that.
well, guys, thank you. Thanks for inspiring us. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Good to see you guys, and we've still got another 2 weeks with you, so we're looking forward to it.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool, man.
Thanks for having us.
Barbecue.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the NCMI podcast, filmed at Iowa Street Studio in Austin, Texas. We are directed by Ryan Peter, production and post-production by Jim Flores, our producer. Special thanks goes to Miles Patnode, Sebastian Sims, and Dino Mercado for camera, sound, and technical production. Also, thanks to Marco Mercado and Hope Rock Church for their support in helping launch this project. Please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, and we'll see you soon.